Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. Hope you are well today. Today I am aglow. You see the sun is hitting my face. And hopefully that's not too intense for you guys. I was thinking that maybe it would be a better lighting rather than worse. Today we're going to talk a little bit about philosophy and what kind of philosophy our INFJ is drawn to. Because as you may know, I have, read a lot of philosophy and I have my idea on the topic. And maybe these thoughts are also inspired by the comments that I've had from readers of this book, The Ecstatic Soul, which you can still get, by the way, at the links below. Amazon link, less than $10, ebook, paperback. Deepest investigation of the INFJ, and quite philosophical, which is why it's interesting to kind of go back to, not necessarily to this book, but to INFJ's relationship to philosophy. The Affinity is another book I wrote last year, philosophical, although it is fiction. Main character apparently is an INFJ. Get a copy at the links below. Supports the channel. You know what also supports the channel? Supporting me on Patreon, guys. Link is below. Anywhere from €3 a month really supports the channel, keeps it going. Appreciate your support. For many people, obviously, philosophy is a somewhat daunting discipline, because it tends to come with a certain jargon, technical language. It appears difficult for philosophers, for one reason or another, not to resort to technical language, which can put off some people. I think one such reason is that often when you use technical language, it allows you to, it provides you with tools of analysis which can make it way faster to proceed than if you were to constantly have to use circumlocutions. Okay, but there's plenty of reasons why the language is difficult. It's often philosophy is an abstract discipline. If the topic being discussed is, metaphysics, or to some extent also the theory of knowledge, epistemology, things like that. So there's a lot of people. There are a lot of people who don't read philosophy, not necessarily because they don't like it. Sometimes they might convince themselves that they don't enjoy it because they think it's just too abstract for them, that it's too wishy-washy for them, that it's not concrete enough, that it's not providing them with real life examples enough. It's not being of enough practical use. Not providing tools to navigate in the everyday world, and that is fine. I think, though, that because of NI lead, INFJs tend to be attracted to philosophical writing. And if you think of someone like Carl Jung, is obviously a big influence for anybody who has an interest in the theory of types and in the INFJ type or other types. Carl Jung's work is very philosophical. I mean, to some extent, it's quite a bit more philosophical than Sigmund Freud's work. The interesting thing is that in terms of influence on later generations of philosophers, especially influential philosophers in the West, Freud has actually been more influential, and that for a number of reasons. Now, if that is of interest, I could make videos in the future to kind of go into that, into why Freud has been more influential on Western philosophy anyway than Jung has, despite the fact that at first sight, and really in terms of their own body of work, if you take Jung's body of work and if you take Freud's body of work, Jung's work is much more pervaded with philosophy, whether it be in the articulation of his own ideas, which are incorporate quite a bit from philosophy, contextualized in terms of philosophical movements, philosophical epochs and concepts. And also in terms of placing his particular way of approaching things within the history of philosophy. Freud doesn't really do that. Freud very much sees himself as a scientist of the psyche, certainly, but still a scientist. So obviously scientists have a relationship to philosophy that's often not completely conscious, because philosophy precedes science in terms of metaphysics over physics and all these things, or theory of knowledge. It's often philosophy explores what the preconditions and presuppositions are that science operates with, and not just science, but science among different regional ontologies, as Heidegger would call these. So Freud's not an INFJ and saw himself very much as a scientist. Jung saw himself as a doctor, certainly, but he was very philosophical, and the philosophical side of his work appeals to INFJs. It appeals to much more than just INFJs, but obviously INFJs do feel a sense of kinship with Jung in this respect. So I do think that for plenty different reasons, including the fact that inferior SE alienates us INFJs from the world, we view the world from a certain perspective which is at one remove compared to the average person. And in this respect, at least, leaving aside the question of the language and the vocabulary which are used in philosophy, in this respect, at least, we sense that there is something there, for us to recognize ourselves in a philosophical work, because by definition, the work of a philosopher starts with the idea that you're puzzled by reality in some way, that reality is more strange than people think. This is how you enter into the reflective mode of being, right? You can be like in the mode, a lot of the time we are, as Charles Taylor would call it, operating in the world in the mode of absorbed coping. We do things and we don't necessarily reflect on these things. We just cope, we operate, we do our things. And sometimes we kind of, something happens, or, some occurrence takes place that causes us to step back and reflect. INFJs, with their mode of alienation being a default mode of existence and existential experience, tend to step back and reflect much more than the average person. And the language and world of philosophy can be, houses for them that they feel comfortable in, if only they were not turned off sometimes by the abstruseness of the reasoning and the abstruseness of the language. Sometimes this has to do with the fact that, maybe, like, if you like, it could be a question of education. Maybe the INFJ simply isn't very educated, and this is not a criticism. It could do with, have to do with them not being from a very affluent social background or something else. Sometimes it could have to do with education, in the sense the INFJ has a training which is very different from philosophical training, and maybe the training that they followed predisposed them to enjoying something very concrete and very immediately practical. But there's a real question here to be asked: is it not sometimes a good idea to wonder whether you might not force yourself at least a little bit to get used to the density and abstruseness of a philosophical work, to see if maybe after a while you realize that it's not a question of finding it less painful, but actually realizing that you really enjoy it. But you need to do yourself a little bit of violence to begin with, because to enter into the abstract world of philosophy is not easy. But once you're in it, it can be very nice, because a lot of the negative comments I've gotten, vast majority of positive comments on my book, The Ecstatic Soul, but a lot of the negative comments basically are about how the book is too complicated, too abstract, not concrete enough, and doesn't resemble a how-to guide enough. And there's obviously two possibilities here. Either the person is not an INFJ, thinks they are INFJ, but of course, like, the INFJ writing is going to turn them off because they're actually not INFJ. Possibility, and certainly some of those readers, were not INFJs, I would say. But it's very likely that there have been INFJs too, that are just not in that gear and are sort of struggling with it or nonplussed by it. And the question is, what is stopping you from giving a chance to this kind of writing? What is it that is, since your own mind is so unusual and strange in so many ways, why not give a chance to something that looks unusual and strange? You might just find a home for it if you are resilient enough. That leaves open the question of, once you accept that you're willing to spend time exploring philosophy, where to start. I've made some videos, on that topic, what kind of philosophy you like, because of course there's lots of different styles. Not all philosophy is particularly technical. It tends to be dense. It tends to have some level of abstraction involved. That's inevitably going to be the case with philosophy because it deals in generalities. In this respect, it's very different from fiction, for instance. But still, there's lots of different strands, lots of different, cultures within the philosophical school. There's the more analytical side, there's the more descriptive side, there's the one that's just focused on the analysis of experience, there's some philosophy that focuses more on mind, some is very technical, some is much more literary. Yet other types are more, written kind of plain language. There's lots of different styles, but to begin with, it's important that we ask ourselves, why are we impatient with a discipline that perhaps best of all disciplines echoes the own strangeness of our being? I'll leave that question open for now, and let's see in the future if I explore this topic further. Perhaps if you would like me to as well. In the meantime, guys, take care and see you at the weekend. Christmas is approaching. I hope you're looking forward to it. Ciao.